Hi, I'm Nick Palmashano,
And I'm Matt Finn.
and this is the Bad News Network. Now that the election is over, it's great to see America come together and calm down for once. Just kidding. Kind of. While nothing is official until the Electoral College convenes and determines our next president-elect, it does appear that Vice President Biden will be that person. I look forward to yet another peaceful exchange of power, and I congratulate our future president-elect as well as our future vice president-elect on their victories and for her on breaking the glass ceiling. If your reaction to me saying this is an immediate pushback to say there are still investigations and allegations and lawsuits, then you are correct. Those things need to be seen to their rightful conclusion, and at this point, nothing is certain. But come on, folks. He probably lost Georgia. Georgia! If I was running for president and I lost Georgia, thus far, reviewing hundreds of thousands of ballots, the president's legal team has identified 182 ballots that could be fraudulent. 182. Republicans and Democrats across the country at the local level who actually run these polling places have virtually unanimously said there's no fraud. Now, it is true that in one county in Michigan, a clerical error put 2,000 votes that were supposed to be in the Trump column into the Biden column. But it's also true that an hour later, those same people that made that clerical error identified it before the press got wind of any of this stuff and fixed it. The initial reports that came out blamed the Dominion software and said, maybe this is an issue across the entire country in all places that use that software. But it turns out that the software wasn't the issue at all. It was how people handled the information. So we're talking about nothing more than human error, which happens all the time in all things. And humans fixed their own error. Nothing nefarious, no big scheme, just a mistake. Why am I harping on this? I'm harping on this because we have to be honest with ourselves, or this whole awesome thing we have going falls apart. Countries are made up. Laws are made up. Money is made up. Civilization is made up. This only works if we believe in it. I believe in it. I think we just had a fair election. Every allegation is being investigated. If somebody cheated, they're going to get caught and they're going to rot in prison for a very long time. But right now, it looks like everyone is doing the right thing. Georgia is doing a full hand recount. Anywhere an issue is being raised, counties are doing recounts. But guys, Biden won this thing. 4 years ago, the hardcore liberals were and moaning about how Trump wasn't their president. It was really stupid and really embarrassing, and it diminished the country, and it really smelled of just being sore losers. I didn't play that game, even though the president has never been my favored brand of Republican. Trump was our president and my president, and I wanted him to be successful over the next 4 years. When the president succeeds, the nation succeeds. And despite what the media has told you nonstop for 4 years, in many ways he did succeed. In fact, most Americans, including most Democrats, feel that the economy would be stronger under President Trump's second term than it would be under Biden. He also has opened the doors to lower prescription drug costs with increased competition across the globe. And while many people have attacked his leadership on COVID, he's been stellar in setting up situations where drug companies can fast-track vaccines and treatments through the American system in a way that's never been allowed before. While people are already arguing, correctly, that Pfizer did not take any money from the government directly in order to develop this vaccine that's about to come out, they did take orders of $2 billion from the government in order to fund it, and they benefited from this fast-track approach. Without the United States government doing that, without the administration doing that, probably there's no vaccine at this point. President Trump is also the first president to publicly and correctly identify China as the greatest threat to the United States and the world. China benefits from a trade imbalance while they do not have to live up to the worker treatment or environmental concerns that America has to. They force companies that want to work in China to give 50% of their company to China, And they have a history of stealing intellectual property from the United States and Europe. They've even gone so far as to place microchips inside of computers and phones with the express purpose of stealing information and turning it over to the state. Now, President Trump's plans and tariffs have not really curbed any of that. In fact, some of them have caused economic problems here in the United States. Nevertheless, this is now an issue that is at the forefront for all politicians. I guarantee that Trump's policies will affect our relationship with China going forward. Prison reform. No president in my lifetime has moved the needle on prison reform. Trump has made a real difference here, especially for Americans that have been jailed for drug usage. The Space Force and NASA. Trump's renewed investments into space have reinvigorated America's desire to explore. We are at our best when we try to achieve what has never been done. And President Trump absolutely deserves credit for starting that process. Militarily, he presided over the killing of ISIS's al-Baghdadi and Iran's Soleimani, two of the most dangerous people to walk the earth in my lifetime. And with any other president in any other time, that would have been enough to win re-election. But this isn't any other president, and these are not normal times. COVID-19 dismantled the economy that the president hung his hat on, and his management of the disease has led to an outsized hit on American soil. While our skilled medical personnel have kept the death rate in line with much of the rest of the civilized world, we have done a miserable job of controlling the spread of the disease. We've essentially suffered all of the economic devastation of the rest of the world, but have done nothing to reduce the spread of the disease. And it was then, with the cloak of a successful economy removed from us, that it all came down to looking at the president's leadership. President Trump has been notorious for being ruthless to his enemies and generous with his supporters. To hear the mainstream media tell it, he's a bigot and a racist. Whether that's true or not, only the president knows for sure. His policies themselves don't seem to bear that out. However, we have seen renewed racial tension under his leadership. As a moderate conservative from the very beginning, I've taken issue with his approach. My belief is that when somebody walks into the Oval Office, they have to put aside their personal views and become a civil servant for all Americans. They have to be the leader for the entire country. That isn't to say that they shouldn't want their worldview reflected in policy. That's the whole reason people run for office. But they have to have a belief that their worldview is going to be best for the country, not just for part of the country. I never saw that in the president. If you weren't on his team, you weren't necessarily going to get any support from him. And let's face it, he was often a dick. And I'll admit it, sometimes when he was a dick, I laughed. Sometimes he was being a dick to people that were so insufferable that I enjoyed the hits. That's a personal failure on my part. And if you think I'm about to drop the Team America World Police speech right here, I've thought about it. But no. I've had this conversation many times with conservatives that I respect, with conservatives I believe in, and they say things like, forget about how he treats people, forget about how he acts, just look at his policies. And I want to, and I get that sentiment. But to me, it's the same thing as those people that say, it's not personal, it's just business, right after they f you over. It is personal, and how you act is often more important than what your actual policy or belief or work product is. I've had bosses and peers and employees that did great work but treated people poorly. I had a boss that led the brigade in gunnery, in metal tasks, in basically anything that an officer is graded on. Everybody looked at the dude like he was a god. But I was there. I was in the room when an E6 came in and told him that his mom was dying and he didn't let that guy leave because he was worried about it hurting his qual scores. And that became a fungus that grew in the organization. It spread like wildfire. He lost all respect as a leader. And I've seen that play out time and time again in the military and in business, where people that do not give a about some of the people in their organization bring down the entire organization. The way that you do things is just as important as doing things. And this is the president's biggest failure. If you weren't on his team, you weren't part of his America. And this hit me hardest with one of my best friends, a guy that I was roommate with for 4 years, a guy that I deployed with, a guy that has served multiple times in the desert, who's done way more for his country than I have, a guy that happens to be a person of color. And he told me for the first time in his life, he doesn't feel safe not being a white person in America. This isn't some liberal snowflake crying about everything and anything, trying to be a victim. This is a hard dude, a dude that has seen some a dude that loves his country, literally worried that he doesn't fit in Trump America. Reagan didn't do that, Bush didn't do that, Clinton didn't do that, W didn't do that, Obama didn't do that, but somehow Trump did. I'm not saying Trump derangement syndrome isn't real. I've watched otherwise reasonable people talk about Trump like psychopaths, like he's the next coming of Ivan the Terrible. He isn't Mussolini, and he certainly isn't Hitler. Those comparisons are stupid. I don't care how many different ways people try to tweak them, massage them, make them fit. They're stupid, they're embarrassing. I believe President Trump, like all presidents before him, did his best the way that he knows how. But his best left a lot of America scared and angry in a way that I haven't seen before. People, admittedly foolishly, are talking about civil war. A lot of us have seen what that looks like. None of us should want it here. President Trump served his country, did his best, and he's developed a massive fan base. More Americans voted in this election than in any previous election. In 2020, President Trump drew 33% more Black and Hispanic voters than he did in 2016, challenging the notion that those communities see him as racist. But he lost ground with women. He lost ground with suburban white people. And he made himself the issue on the ballot. No one was talking about policy this year. You were either for or against Trump. I don't even know what the Democrats stood for. And the country, by the slimmest of margins, has decided that it is against Trump. And now everyone has a choice. We've got crazy Democrats talking about vengeance and lists of people that supported Trump and trying to get payback for all time. And we've got Republicans talking about giving Biden the Trump treatment. Pay him back for the last 4 years. Folks, it's been a bad 4 years. Whatever behavior that you ascribe to Trump or the mainstream media or crying liberal Democrats or cocky, smug Republicans. At the end of the day, none of their behavior is possible without our bad behavior. Let's break that cycle. President Trump, thank you for your service to the nation. Only 4 living people know how hard your job has been. Vice President Biden, you are about to become our president and my president of the United States. I pray that you continue to drive the United States forward, that you conquer COVID, that you successfully solve the challenges that come before you over the next 4 years, that you successfully deal with the impending Chinese threat, and most importantly, that you live up to your pledge to be president for all Americans. Also, we could do without all of that gun grabbing and court packing nonsense. I'm going to be relentless about that, just giving you a heads up.
The Senate hangs in the balance, and it all comes down to January's runoff election in Georgia. The Republicans have won 50 seats and the Democrats hold, for all intents and purposes, 48. If the Democrats win both seats in Georgia, it will give them the Senate 50-50, which means the deciding vote comes down to Kamala Harris, which means they essentially control all 3 houses. That result is possible, but with Republicans gaining seats in the House and fending off the blue wave, it's a tall order for the notoriously red state. We look forward to seeing a lot of rich people spend billions of dollars on that one over the next 60 days.
It's been a terrible and great 2 weeks for COVID. First, the bad. COVID is spiking in a way that we have not seen yet, with 143,000 cases a day. If this trend continues, you need to expect that we're going to have state governments lock people down in the same way that they did in March and April. That's going to be a nightmare for small business, and one that I'm not sure people are going to easily recover from. Now on to the good. Yay, science! Seriously, scientists, you guys are awesome. We've had 2 big wins this week. First, from Pfizer, that has announced that their vaccine for COVID is 90% effective and starts working after only 2 days. This is not peer-reviewed yet, so it could all be but if it isn't this is significantly better than the 70% rate that scientists generally consider a success. One thing about the vaccine, though, is it has to be super cooled in order to be effective. That kind of makes distribution a but that's a problem we'll handle. A little easier to keep things cold than it is to come up with a vaccine to stave off a pandemic. If the peer review process goes well over the next month, then we could see this vaccine starting to come out in America as early as the end of this year, but most likely it's going to hit us in large numbers, probably at the beginning of the summer, end of spring, and we're still looking at about 12 to 18 months before we have herd immunity. The second win came from Eli Lilly that has created a cocktail of drugs to help stave off the virus once you get it. When given the cocktail, people have a decreased viral load within 3 days and a virtual zero viral load in 11 days. Patients also had a decreased need for more serious treatments once they were on the cocktail. Viral load, cocktail. Only 0.9% of patients taking the cocktail had to go to the ER, compared to 5.8% of patients that were only taking placebo. The cocktail is similar to the Regeneron treatment given to the president when he had COVID. Anyway, it's likely going to get a lot uglier before it gets better, but for the first time since this whole thing kicked off, we have some real hope.
Just a few days after Pfizer announced its success with the vaccine, the Russians chimed in, saying theirs was just as effective, if not slightly more. The Russian vaccine Sputnik 5, which is the new name for just about everything they make these days, is 92% effective, 2% over that of Pfizer's at 90%. Classic Putin. It should be noted, however, that the 92% effectiveness comes with a word of caution from scientists all across the globe. The head of the World Health Organization was quoted as saying very scientifically, "Yeah, I wouldn't take that Russian vaccine." Among the 20,000 people that have taken the Russian vaccine, at least 20 per week have contracted the Rona. They are, however, now really jacked athletes. According to a European professor of public health, Martin McKee, that 20-person per week statistic is not a very strong basis for 92%. Although I'm not sure you need to be a professor to realize that.
In other news, a cat in Sri Lanka was detained on possession of heroin charges. When asked where he acquired the drugs, the cat just stared at the police and then pushed a vase off the table. Unfortunately, the cat has since escaped from jail. Yes, that really happened. While its whereabouts are currently unknown, it is presumed that the cat is heading to Oregon.
NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine has plans to resign instead of working under a Biden administration. This comes as quite a shock, as he wasn't in the position for very long and has been a driving force in the pursuit of commercial spaceflight. While Bridenstine claims that this has nothing to do with political alignment, the timing's a little coincidental. Bridenstine was one of the loudest proponents to build a space base on the south pole of the moon in 2024. That's right around the corner. Given that he's now stepping down, it's unclear as to whether or not those plans will move forward or falter without him. The Artemis program was also the plan for the U.S. to reach Mars and ferry and transport people and supplies back and forth from the Earth to Mars. Well, I guess it just wasn't written in the stars. Perhaps he just needs some space. Maybe those plans are just too out of this world. Get it?
China is at it again. You motherfuckers! This time, Xi Jinping and the old CCP are looking to erase Mongol history. During the past month, the CCP has worked to expunge any knowledge of Genghis Khan, or for that matter, the history of Mongolia. Protests sprung up after the stone tablets in Genghis Khan Square citing the history of Genghis Khan were destroyed in Mongolia. A month previous to this, the Chinese actually reached out to the French History Museum and tried to take over the exhibit to erase Genghis Khan's name or any references to him or Mongolia. The summary of their intent is simply to erase all Mongolian history. World leaders have done little more than condemn these actions and go about their day. I don't know any prominent or outspoken Mongolian leaders, but for sure the WHO will have something to say about this.
2020 hasn't exactly been a stellar year, and the past few weeks have been chaotic with US politics. On October 31st, just 2 weeks ago, it saddened the world to hear that Sir Sean Connery had passed away. He died quietly in his sleep at his home in Nassau, Bahamas. His family made a public statement saying that while his health had been failing for quite some time, it still came as a heavy blow. The world offered its condolences and paid homage to the late great Scotsman across the internet. Best known for his role as James Bond, amongst many other memorable roles, Mr. Connery set the standard for being a man even outside of his action-packed roles. Actor Michael Caine famously retold the story of being out on the town at a nightclub with Mr. Connery when a group of unruly dudes were heckling a girl on stage who was trying to sing. He said Mr. Connery got up and beat the brakes off of 4 of those guys while Michael Caine stood there holding his coat. To the man himself, Sir Sean Connery. Fair wind, sir.
Entomologists in Washington found nearly 200 murder hornet queens while working to eradicate a nest in Washington this week. Scientists say the nest was about 1/4 the size of the nests found in Japan. Regardless of the small size, the fact that 200 queens were coming out of this one nest have scientists very worried. Some would say they were abuzz with worry. Still, optimism is high that smart people will lay waste to these murder hornets and keep them from developing a fob in North America.
I know we're the bad news network, but here's a bit of good news. On Wednesday, an 81-year-old Italian man named Stefano Bozzini was seen playing his accordion for his hospitalized wife. Bozzini, as a young man, served in the Italian Army's Alpini Mountain Division. During his service, his unit nicknamed him Gianni Morandi of the Alpines. Medical staff stated that he wasn't actually allowed to see his wife because of COVID restrictions, so the closest he could get to her was playing out on the street just outside of her hospital window. The footage shows him sitting outside, bobbing his head back and forth, tapping his feet, and playing her favorite songs. Because that's amore.
And finally, in Florida Man news, 49-year-old Henry Arce Caballero was arrested for losing his at a Checkers employee that failed to put lettuce on his sandwich. Reports say that sometime after 11 p.m., Henry was seen banging his fists against the glass at a Checkers drive-thru, screaming and knocking over a bunch of pamphlets that were sitting there. When police arrived, he denied the allegations entirely. Henry then became agitated and refused to show police any identification. They told him to remain calm, but he refused and hence was taken into custody. One employee said she would have called the police sooner, but her head wasn't in the right place when the chaos ensued. Before judging her, let us all remember that things move very quickly. Shortly thereafter, the FDA recalled 3,396 cartons of lettuce for possible E. coli contamination. It is possible that these two stories are related and that Henry Arce Caballero is just the tip of the iceberg. Arugula! And with that, I'm Nick Palmisano.
And I'm Matt Finney.
And this is the Bad News Network. Our news is at least as bad as the news you're getting already. And just remember, as always, you can get 25% off at rangerup.com when you use the code BNN. You can also see great behind the scenes at our OnlyFans account, Nick and Matt. Have a great weekend.